In the PCF 2.0 ecosystem, the technology that runs it is BOSH. Now at Pivotal, we call BOSH the PCF Director. So in this workshop, we're going to show you how to actually deploy that PCF Director inside of PCF Ops Manager. So at this point, you should already have a PCF Ops Manager deployed and running. So you navigate to the Ops Manager and you log in. And notice that we have a tile here that's set up for vSphere, and it says Ops Manager Director for VMware vSphere. And notice that it's orange. Orange means caution because it still needs to be configured. So we click on it, and then you click on vCenter Config. Inside of vCenter Config, we configure how we're going to actually talk to our cloud or our IaaS. And in this case, we're talking to vSphere or vCenter. So first you need to grab your vCenter host, and so this is going to be your host name of your vCenter. Grab your vCenter username, that's what you use to log into vCenter. Now this user has to have a few privileges such as deleting, creating VMs, folders, disks, etc. And then grab the password for that username, put that in here, followed by the data center name. So inside of vCenter, you need to have a data center. Okay, and so in this case, my data center is just called data center. So there's data center. Then you can choose the type of disk you want to keep. So do we want to have thin provision disks or thick provision disks? You can choose that right here. And finally, you have to choose the data store names that you want to use. Now, when we create VMs, and that's what's happening underneath the covers, each VM has two disks. It has a persistent disk, or something that sticks around forever, and then you have an ephemeral disk. An ephemeral disk goes away and comes back when you create or delete a VM. So if we take a look at my data center under the disks and storage view, you can see that I only have one data store, but you might have multiple. So go ahead and select the data store that you want for your ephemeral disks and your persistent disks. These could also be comma delimited, just like this, if you had multiple data stores. In this case, I only have one. For this demo, we are going to choose standard vCenter networking. You could choose NSX if you have that available. And finally, you choose which folders inside of vSphere. We go and take a look at the templates and VM folders view. What the folder names are that we're going to store the VMs in, store the templates in, and finally, what folder we're going to store the disks in. Once that's all configured, go ahead and click Save. And then we go to the Director Config tab. Inside of here, we need to configure the NTP server that all our VMs will use to keep time in sync. If you want to use the JMX Bridge product, you can configure that here. The Health Monitor Forwarder, you can also configure. For PKS specifically, we need to ensure that we enable post-deploy scripts. Also, we can check off Enable VM Resurrector plugin if that's what you would like. VM Resurrector ensures that when a VM goes down, we will bring it back up automatically. Finally, if you wanted to recreate all VMs, you could check that off. You could also enable BOSH deploy retries. If you have a few problems, you can actually try it up to 5 times. You can also, for debugging purposes, you can keep VMs that are not reachable. And you can also configure HM PagerDuty plugins and email for whenever VMs come down. You can get a notification. And then you can configure a blob store for storing blobs. Configure the database for, in this case, I'm going to use internal for both. And at the bottom here, we are able to configure the number of workers. So that's the number of VMs that we have to run tasks, and the number of threads that the director can perform at the same exact time. And if you wanted to register the director to a host name, you could also do that. A new feature to PCF is also that you can add a custom SSH banner if that's for compliance. Once you're all set there, go ahead and click Save. Then we'll jump over to creating availability zones. In this case, I've already created AZ1, It's normally recommended to have multiple AZs, if a minimum of 3 for a highly available cluster. But at this point, this is just for development and testing purposes, so I only have one AZ. The cluster is comes from vSphere. So just like the data center, in vSphere we have something called clusters. And in this case, my cluster is again just called cluster. And then if you wanted, you could add a resource pool. Now, before you actually put that in there, you have to make sure that the resource pool is created in vSphere. So in this case, I could put RP01 because I have RP01 over here, but I am not going to do that for this example. Next, we're going to come down to networks. So in this case, I have 2 networks enabled. I have the PKS management network, and I also have the PKS clusters network. The PKS management network is for the PKS management VMs. Now this is going to be VMware Harbor, the PKS API single VM, and for BOSH, the actual director that we are configuring. And so inside of here, we need the vSphere network name that we're going to deploy these VMs on. You can find the network names available to you by coming into vSphere and looking at the networks available. In this case, I'm going to put them on the VM network. And then I have to choose a CIDR that the VMs will use when they come up. Of course, they need IPs to be able to communicate. There is a few quick websites in the demo material for you to calculate the correct CIDR. But in this case, I'm going to have the range from 10.0.1.0 all the way up to 10.0.1.255. And I'm going to split that range. So I'm going to reserve the second half of that range from 128 to 255. And the beginning portion from 0 to 127, I'm going to use for this specific network. Inside of that network, I have a DNS server, and I also have a gateway in case I want to talk outside of my subnet. I'll assign the AZ to AZ1. Normally, again, you'd have multiple AZs. And that's going to actually create my PKS management network. That's where, again, that's going to be where my PKS VM lives, my BOSH VM, and my Harbor VM lives. For the other side of it, right, when I go ahead and create Kubernetes clusters for developers, I want to have a separate network so I don't conflict with my management and my runtime. And so if we take a look here, I've got another network called PKS clusters. This time I have the service network checked off. That enables me to have an on-demand network, essentially, or the ability to add and remove VMs on demand. And then I'll give it the same network name since I'm using the same vSphere network. I'm going to give it the same CIDR because I want it to live in the same subnet. It's not a necessary requirement as long as there's routing between each. But this time, I want to reserve the first half of the range. Remember, up here I reserved the second half, so now I'm reserving the first half, so none of the VMs that get created will conflict with the first half. So I'm reserving from 0 to 127. And of course, I have a DNS and a gateway again. I'll click Save on that. And then we'll come down here and we'll select our AZ that we're going to have our director live in. And we'll also select the network that we're going to have our director live in. Finally, security, we're going to keep that the same. We are secure by default by having generate passwords here. So click Save. Also, if you wanted to add certificates across all of your VMs that gets deployed by our PCF Ops Manager director, then you could put a cert here, a CA certificate. If you wanted to configure a syslog to have all of the logs that BOSH or our PCF Ops Manager director, we can actually send all those logs out to a syslog server. And then if you wanted to scale up any of this or scale out either one of the director VMs or the compilation VMs, we could change that here. Once you're all set, just go ahead and click Save. Make sure there's green checks all the way down. And then you'll see that our box is green, which means that we're ready to go. And you can see over here in the pending changes, we're going to hit Apply Changes. And what that's going to do is that's going to actually go ahead and deploy out our first VM or our BOSH director. So once the install finishes, you can actually click Verbose and you can actually take a look at what happened. Here it compiled all the packages for BOSH, it created the BOSH VM, and then it actually laid down those packages. and then it started up the BOSH VM. And here's the executed steps. And then if we go back to PCF Ops Manager, you'll see the Ops Manager Director tile is green. Click on that tile, we go to Status. You can actually see the status of the VM with the IP of the BOSH director, what is the load average, the CPU, the memory, the disk, the ephemeral disk, the persistent disk, and then even the credentials for that VM. So the director credentials, all of these credentials, which you'll use at a later point. At this point, you now have a BOSH director deployed.